Good evening, everyone. Tonight is a regular session of the South Kingstown Planning Board. The date is Tuesday, June 28, 2022. The time is now 7:04 p.m. The first item on our agenda is roll call. Susan Axelrod.
Here.
Joe Murphy is absent. Paul Jordan.
Here.
Robin Pothier.
Here.
Peter DiStefano. Here. And Maria Mack is here. Our next agenda item is the consent agenda. This consists of approval of minutes May 24, 2022, regular session, and the report of the administrative officer. If there are no changes or corrections to the consent agenda, I'd like to entertain a motion for approval.
I'll make that motion.
We have a motion from Susan. Do we have a second? Second from Peter. Is there further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Our next agenda item is a request for extension of combined master preliminary plan approval, major land development project, Hampton Place, full build-out. Is there anyone representing the applicant?
Yes. My name is Brian King from Crossman Engineering. I'm here on behalf of the applicant, Chatham Properties. Chatham Properties is requesting a 2-year extension for combined master preliminary plan approval that they received for Hampton Place back in May of 2015. From our review, this plan is still in accordance with the comprehensive plan, and it meets the land development and zoning ordinances. The reason for the extension is this Hampton Place, it's on a 5-acre parcel. It's 3 new buildings with 1 existing building. The new buildings would be for office, professional, and medical. And as we know, over the last couple of years, things have changed. The need for office space is unsettled. These are professional and medical office buildings. So the applicant would like to extend his master preliminary plan approval for 2 years so he can firm up a user, a tenant for that site before he starts construction or submittal of the final plan.
Thank you, Mr. King. It is my understanding that the board can technically only grant a 1-year extension. Amy, do you have comments on that?
Under state law, the initial vesting period is 2 years with the right to extend for 2 1-year extensions. Those are the by right extensions. After that period of time, the planning board can potentially grant a longer extension for cause shown. But in the initial 2 + 2, the 4-year period, the extensions would be 1 year at a time.
Thanks, Amy. Questions from board members? Robin.
So I'm a little concerned with extending it in light of the construction discharge into the Indian Run and contributing waters. That looks like that permission has a time frame to it, and maybe there are new constraints that should be kept up with as time goes by.
If I may say that for this approval, we did receive DEM approval for the stormwater design, and that approval is still valid until 2025. So all of the design conditions were met at that time, and our approval is still current.
So I did see the 2025, but it wasn't really clear as to how. I'm looking at the last page. I don't see the 2025 at all. And this would be, these have dates of, should expire September 25th, 2018.
Yes, this was I think you might be looking at what I included in the original package, and that was, it was an email correspondence confirming that this approval from DEM was still valid. This was an email from Tracy Pena at DEM, and Neil Persinicus was also attached and had responded that this permit is still valid.
Is the letter referring to the $100 fee continuing to be paid
Yes.
on April of 2021? Okay, all right. I follow you then. Thank you.
So what's the condition of the site now? Has it been cleared? Is it?
It remains as it did back when we received the approval. It's a 5-acre parcel that's right across the street from the Governor Stedman building, and it's actually a good 20 years ago we were before this board for development of Wakefield Meadows, the condominiums, and it was the same applicant or the same owner. And at that time, he had carved out this 5-acre piece for an office use. And a few years after Wakefield Meadows was constructed, he had come back and he, for the office use, Koch Eye building was approved, and the remainder of the site was for these 3 new buildings that we're requesting an extension for, and that site has not been changed.
So this
It's
is
still vegetated.
adjacent to Koch Eye or adjacent to the hotel?
In back of, adjacent to Koch Eye, it's that same property. It's field as far as I know. It hasn't been touched at all.
So no erosion issues or anything that would
There's
impact?
no erosion issues, I don't believe, no.
Other questions, comments from board members? Rich, do you have any thoughts on this as far as the RIPTES permit going until 2025?
No, not at this time. Eventually, when this comes to, to be built and they're pulling building permits, will require that everything's in place at that point. If they don't have an active DEM permit, when they pull a building permit, they won't be building. They'll have to resubmit, and whether they fall under any older regulations or newer regulations, that'll be up to them to figure out. But we will ask that it's all updated at that point.
Very good, thank you. We have a draft motion for consideration on page 2 of the staff comments for this project. Someone like to make that motion?
I'll make that motion. South Kingstown Planning Board hereby extends the combined conceptual master and preliminary plan approval for the Hampton Place full build-out major land development project, a proposed 4-building, 1 existing, full build-out development plan with 3 new buildings totaling 40,000 square feet in floor area, AP 50-4, Lot 24, located at 4847 Tower Hill Road, for a period of 1 year or until August 1st, 2023. This extension is based on the following findings of fact and conditions of approval. Findings of fact A through F and conditions of approval. I lost a page. I guess it's just 1 through 3. 1 and 2, yes.
We have a motion from Paul. Do we have a second? Second from Peter. Is there further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
Our next agenda item is a request for extension of preliminary plan approval, major subdivision Heritage Estates. Is there anyone representing the applicant?
Dominic Grassi, 50 Monticelli Drive, West Kingston. As we've done in the past 4 years, we applied an extension. The project was designed as a family compound, and we did it in 2 phases because at that time there were only 6 family members ready to build, and the situation hasn't changed. We've left the land as it was when we bought the property, and there have been no changes. And so we've come back every year asking for an extension.
Are you expecting any changes to occur?
No. I imagine at some point you won't give us the extension, so we'll just record the lots. And but it's not like we're going to sell the properties to non-family members. We're in a situation where we can keep the lots, and we just want to keep things as they are. And I guess realistically, we're just avoiding some legal fees to have them recorded and have an engineering fees. And we are paying taxes on the lots as they're 4 lots in 2 parcels, so we pay taxes on them as two parcels. So they are being taxed. We're just, if it's possible, we just would like to hold off doing the recording and putting them in, and it would involve putting them in the company name or in someone's name, and we're just trying to avoid all of those legal things, that's all.
Thank you. Questions, comments from board members? None? We have another draft motion for this item on page 2 of 2 for this issue. Would someone like to make that motion?
I can do that. The South Kingstown Planning Board hereby grants an extension of the final plan approval for Phase 2 of the Heritage Estates major subdivision located at AP 8-4, Lot 20, and AP 13-1, Lot 54, on Monticelli Drive for 1 year or until June 30th, 2023. This reinstatement and extension is based on the following findings of fact, 1 through 6.
We have a motion from Susan. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Paul. Is there further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next agenda item is a public hearing on a major subdivision, no street creation, change to a previously approved plan, Owl Acre subdivision. Is there anyone representing the applicant?
Hi, I'm Chuck Baus.
James Wilcox, how are you?
Good evening. If you could give us a little more information on the requested change.
Yeah,
Just be sure to speak into the mic so the tape picks up your
not
comments.
a problem. So originally, the plan was approved with sewer connections. When we started going forward to try to make the sewer connections, and we went to the lot and we were looking around, we had noticed that the sewer manhole stopped prior to the lot. So we went down into the office to go and confirm. And after a little bit more further investigation, they said, hey, you know what? That must have been the wrong plan. This updated plan does show that it stops a little bit before there. So at that point, we said, you know, what's our other alternatives? Looking into extending the sewer main. There's a 20-something home development that has a force main that comes into that, which would incur a large cost. And we said, you know, if there is not sewer available, would we be able to do a septic system and design? So at that point, they said, yes, we could go ahead with that. And we had done soil evaluations with DEM. DEM is all okay with that, and just trying to move forward with that.
Thank you. Questions, comments from board members?
I'm sorry, so you do have your DEM permit for a septic system?
We had the engineer go out and do soil evaluations and had talked with them and to make sure that the sites were suitable, and everything has been ready to move forward with that, but just we need the confirmation.
Okay. Thank you.
I don't think we didn't get the permit on it. We were at the point where we were just trying to get a pre-approval to see.
Approval from us before you get approval from them. Yeah.
Yeah, just
Before
to
you
see
waste
where
your
we
time
were
and
at.
money.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
And how will the installation of the OWTS impact the limit of disturbance that you have delineated on your plan?
Everything would fall within the limited disturbance.
Do the neighboring properties have on-site waste disposal? Past the last manhole?
I believe the one neighbor is
Yeah,
connected.
the stone house, as we call it, I believe, is connected.
Is connected.
Is connected.
Madam Chair,
So my question is, do any of
Robin?
the surrounding properties have on-site waste disposal?
Not to my knowledge.
Madam Chair,
Robin, Jamie
may.
has a clarification for you.
if the applicants do not speak clearly into the microphone, none of their testimony will be recorded this evening. If you cannot hear the echo, there's a difference. This does not get recorded.
Awesome.
This gets recorded.
Yeah, not to our
Thank you.
understanding.
So there's a chance it might not be approved.
No, DEM will allow it.
Okay, you have that.
We've talked
you
to
have that.
DEM, yep, and DEM will allow it, yep.
This is only a two-lot subdivision, so.
I think the closest on site is Watson Farm, which is a ways down the road.
I mean, personally, I'm for recharge.
Other questions, comments?
Yeah,
Anybody?
does this require any additional removal of trees on the site or to fit those septic systems in? Or
No, it won't.
Thank you.
No further comments. We have a motion
Madam
on
Chair?
page.
Just one additional item, and I apologize for the timeliness of this. We did receive correspondence from the Public Service Department from the Director, John Schock, dated June 28, 2022, addressed to Miss Amy Saunders regarding Owl Acre Subdivision Sewer Feasibility Study. Dear Mrs. Saunders, please be advised that this office reviewed a sewer feasibility study dated June 24, 2022, and the conclusion of that is that upon review of the sewer feasibility study, it is my finding and determination that the subject subdivision parcels can be adequately serviced by on-site wastewater treatment, and connection of the subject parcels to the town's municipal sanitary sewer system is not required. And again, that was authored today by John Schock, Public Service Director. Received that, I believe, at 3:28 p.m. today.
Thank you, Jamie.
That's why it's not in your packet.
Any further questions or comments? Robin,
I
go
would
ahead.
just comment on the sheet we have that it says the property was approved by the planning board at a regular meeting on September 28th of 2022, which hasn't happened yet. Under property characteristics, the last sentence.
Noted. Good catch, Robin. So we have a motion that begins on page 2 of 3, if someone would like to make that motion.
I got it. Do we need to close the public hearing?
This is,
Draft motions for consideration, closure of public hearing. South Kingstown Planning Board hereby closes the public hearing on the change to a previously approved plan application of the Owl Acres major subdivision.
before you do that, let me just see if there's anyone in the audience who is here for this. Is there anyone here for the Owl Acres subdivision? Please continue with your motion.
So is this two motions? One to close the public hearing and then the decision? Or okay, so closure public hearing, South Kingstown Planning Board hereby closes the public hearing on the change to a previously approved plan application of the Owl Acres major subdivision.
We have a motion from Paul. Do we have a second? Second from Peter. Is there further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. And then second motion.
Next motion, South Kingstown Planning Board hereby approves the requested change to a previously approved plan for the Owl Acres subdivision, a two-lot major subdivision for single-family development located at the intersection of Kingstown and Saugatucket Roads. Chuck Bowes of Bowes Builders, applicant owner. Specifically, this approval allows the applicant to utilize on-site wastewater treatment systems, OWTS, for wastewater services in lieu of the previously approved connection to the municipal sewer systems for both of these parcels. This approval is based on the following findings of fact and conditions of approval. It's findings of fact A through J, conditions of approval 1 through 13.
We have a motion from Paul. Do we have a second?
A second?
Second from Robin. Is there further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next agenda item is a public hearing, major subdivision, no street creation, combined conceptual master and preliminary plan, Hemmerly subdivision. Is there anyone representing the applicant?
Good evening, Christopher Zangari for the applicant. We're here today on a two-lot subdivision, 350 Ministerial Road. The notice to abutters was mailed before the hearing. I sent an affidavit with copies of the receipts. Would you like the green cards that I've received? Or do you need those? We're here today under the flexible design subdivision regulation. The reason being that there's only 99.1 feet of frontage on Ministerial Road, and we're proposing to use the existing driveway as a shared driveway for a portion, about 30 to 40 feet in from the public roadway, and then a new driveway will branch off around back of this 7.8 acre parcel. The proposed new dwelling unit will be serviced by OWTS. We have an engineer here to describe to you briefly what's already in your package regarding the drainage calculations and any issues or questions you may have with that, as well as the surveyor of the property. The second dwelling unit will be significantly behind the first. It will not be visible from the street. It will not be visible by the current house. It will not be visible to any of the neighbors. It's a fairly wooded area, and it's got some nice slopes and contours, a really beautiful piece of property. And we've got those witnesses. We also have the owners here. If you have any questions and you'd like to hear from them, we have them as well. But if you don't have any questions now, I'd bring up the engineer, Anthony Nenna, whose report you have in your package, and he can give you a brief overview of his calculations if you'd like.
Thank you. Are there any initial questions from board members? Please continue.
Mr. Nenna? Let's put this here.
Good evening. For the record, Anthony Nenna with On-Site Engineering. I prepared the engineering drawings, the driveway design, drainage, and the plan profile that's that's part of the site plan package. So this roadway or driveway, I should say, is about 850 feet long from the intersection of the driveway to the lower house to the upper house. I've incorporated a couple of best management practices and in the drainage design. A few of them, I've designed the driveway as total impervious area, as if it was paved. That would give me a higher runoff amount that I would have to handle for, and that would be designed for the worst case scenario. Also, the cross-section of the driveway is a crowned cross-section that will divert most of the runoff to either side of the driveway, where I designed grass swales along the edge of the driveway. In the steep part of the driveway, I've incorporated check dams in the swales to serve a couple functions. One, to slow the velocities down in the channels or in the swales, and also allow water to be retained behind the check dams for infiltration. And then again, to prevent any down gradient erosion or excessive runoff. The side slopes we tried to keep at between 2-to-1 and 3-to-1 side slopes. That's what dictated the outskirts of the grading and the limits of disturbance. And the areas that have a 2-to-1 side slope, we've incorporated erosion control blankets. So once those slopes are established, the blanket would go down, and that would prevent any erosion that would occur during a rain event until the grass is established or vegetation is established on those slopes. The remaining 3-to-1 slopes would just be seeded and would not need a erosion control blanket. We also tried to separate the impervious area as much as I could. For example, the runoff that's coming off the house, we have it's collected in a gutter system, and it will be discharged into some underground infiltration stone trenches. Again, that would avoid we're taking more impervious area out of the drainage that would be contributing to the driveway. The last item at the very bottom of the driveway, I've designed a small infiltration area that would further collect any runoff that would bypass the check dams and get into that lower infiltration area. And again, that's primarily so our peak discharges off-site wouldn't exceed the down gradient area and the neighbor to the south. So all the design is designed to incorporate all the runoff within our property. And finally, I've put erosion control silt fence along the limits of disturbance to protect any runoff from going to the south, and again, collect and prevent any erosion from occurring. I'd be happy to answer some questions if the...
Very good, thank you. I'm sure board members have a few questions. Paul, why don't you start?
So the driveway is paved, and I just want to understand something you said. Did you say that you were treating the entire limits of disturbance as a paved area when you did your calculation?
No, the driveway itself I did as an impervious surface. The DEM usually requires any type of gravel surface would be a curved number a lot higher that would be equivalent to like a impervious. So by doing that, I'm using the maximum flow rate that could possibly occur at any event.
So I see a note here that says portion of driveway to be paved. I guess what I'm trying to understand is the driveway paved from the street all the way down to the house, or only the?
At this design, it's only paved on the steep part, and the rest is gravel.
Okay.
But I treated the gravel as an impervious surface.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can you clarify a couple of things for us? I think it's important for board members and members of the public to understand the slope and the topography of the site, which obviously influenced your design. And the other question I have is with regard to if you can show the drawing adjacent to the intersection of Ministerial Road and the driveway that shows that the tension. Yes, can you zoom in on that? To me, it looks as though the detention pond goes into the buffer, which, as you know, it's a scenic roadway, and that is not allowed. So I would be concerned about the location of that. not just the detention area itself, but what would be involved in construction of that. And it would be important to ensure that that can be adjusted slightly to allow for the final product as well as the construction of that.
Yes, that infiltration area can be pulled back out of the buffer zone.
And I'm sure you have a narrative that goes along with your erosion sediment control plan. It would be important for that buffer, which should remain undisturbed, to be staked out in the field prior to commencing any work. Can you tell us a little bit more about the topography of the site? I know that this has been through TRC, but again, just to refresh everyone's memory.
What would be helpful is if I had the plan and profile. I have
That would be good. Yes.
So the dashed line that's labeled existing conditions, that's the center line of the roadway. So you can see it's fairly level at the first, or fairly shallow slope at the first couple hundred feet. I believe it's 2%, just over 2%. And then once you hit about station 2 to station 2 to 4, it increases. 2 to 6, it increases to almost 11%. And again, I tried to balance the cut and fill, so we're not bringing in material. We're trying to use material that's on site. That was one of the things that led to this particular profile. You could see where anything below that little opened area there, that's a fill. So that would be material that we would take from the cut and put in the fill to kind of balance that volume out. And then once you got to the top of the hill, it flattened out. At about 2%.
And
that's where the house was.
Do the soils on site allow for the cut and fill to be effective?
Yeah, I mean, I think the soil, per the test pits, the soils were all a gravelly, sandy soil. It wasn't organic soils. It was decent material. Probably the same material you would have had to bring in. So it's very good material.
And in your ENS plan, do you have any specific criteria relative to the erosion control blanket and the longevity of that? What the time frame would be for its functionality, so that it could be replaced if necessary, or have you?
The blanket that I specified is a permanent blanket. It lasts for, I believe, 5 to 10 years. It's got polypropylene in it, so it doesn't have the coconut fibers that decay over time. It has, so it's what's considered a permanent erosion control blanket.
Can I ask?
Thank you.
Can I ask for clarification? I'm sorry. That's a new term to me. Can you explain to me what that is and how that works? Erosion control blanket?
Okay, it's a fabric that's manufactured, and it's made up of, it's like a fishnet, except it's thicker material that's webbed just like a fishnet, and they weave. Sometimes they put seed mix in it, so that and you staple it down on the slope, and that prevents the water from traveling underneath it and eroding the material underneath it. It travels on top of it, and it won't erode the base material out.
Sorry, so it's not like a fishnet that you lay on the soil and you plant and then it grows through. It actually has seed material and some kind of grow substance in that weave?
Some blankets have the seed mix in it. Others you have to hydroseed or establish the vegetation, and it grows through it.
Okay. But in either case, you're talking about a permanent installation of this material until
Yes.
some generation when it breaks down.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
No, any other comments from board members, questions? Robin?
First of all, can I ask what we refer to review today? The comment is the applicant should incorporate a right to drain provision between the two lots associated with this. Could you explain to me what that is?
Well,
Do we have it?
well, due to the topography, the proposed lot or the proposed house drains naturally towards the lower house. So what I think what the TRC committee wanted was a stipulation on the plans that allowed some of the water to naturally flow onto the lower lot.
By lower lot, do you mean of the same subdivision or an abutters lot?
No, the down gradient lot that's owned by the applicant.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I noticed when I look at the map that the 4 or 5 houses to the north have avoided cutting through that steep section, and their driveways all come in from the other side. And I'm wondering if that option was considered and what the results of that inquiry was.
I'm not familiar how. So the other lots came in from the back of rather than Ministerial, a different location?
From somewhere further up Ministerial Road, and then they all, 4 or 5 houses all come in from behind.
Yeah.
That.
Well, on this particular one, the applicant only owns this one parcel.
Well, I
Other
understand,
properties
but
are owned by.
those other 5 lots must have had a similar situation, so I was wondering how they worked that out, how they're all coming in from one extended driveway, and why we can't do that here, which would make a waiver a little more realistic in my mind than to, look for a waiver from the frontage when we're also have this horrendous driveway to deal with.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know. I mean, as far as accessibility, this is the only way to access the rear of the property. They don't own any properties
So, I believe that
adjacent.
the first abutters were the Wallaces. Have they been approached at all? And they are here. Okay, so I think that's something we could talk about.
Approach as far as purchasing property to. Is that what you?
Currently, all those lots must have some type of accommodation that's allowing them all access to their lots. This is just one more lot down that line.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the other.
I think I can answer that question to some degree.
Yes, please, Ryan.
The 5 lots to the north are part of a subdivision of its own, and part of that subdivision created that separate right-of-way that runs through all 5 of those lots. Certainly, the owner of this lot could talk to them to see if there is a willingness to grant access. However, they have absolutely no obligation to grant that access. They might also want to sell him the access, which would relate to development costs on his.
Yep, and that's the scenario I assumed. But I would like to see that the idea has been examined, because trying to put a driveway through that steep section, that's a lot of work. It might cost less money to approach your abutters and see if you could come in through the back. And let's not forget about winter.
Yes. Yep.
Other questions, comments from board members?
I do.
Go ahead, Susan.
I have a couple of questions for you. So, is this property right now pretty heavily wooded? Or is it open meadow up here behind the first house, up that, where the driveway is going and where the house is potentially to be built? Is that wooded now?
Yes.
Okay, so do you have an estimate of the width of the amount of trees that you'll need to remove to do this heavy driveway construction? And how much, so what's the width of the land disturbance, which won't be nearly as simple as just putting a driveway in? And likewise, if you hit ledge or stone, how will you accommodate that? And my last question also is, the other picture that's on this screen that shows the undulating landscape, are there retaining walls, or how are you planning to shore up that southern property line on the places you have to do some major filling? I don't understand from the plans.
So
Yeah.
that's the one you're talking about?
Okay. So yeah, those are kind of my three-part question.
Can we go back to the other
Okay.
one that shows the a little bit better? I can explain a little better from the other slide. So if you see that thick dotted line that goes around the grading, that's the limits of disturbance.
Okay.
That's I can't see. It's 43,475 square feet, so it's under an acre of disturbance.
I'm sorry, it's
So-
43,000 square feet of disturbance to build that portion of the driveway?
Yes. That's that thick dotted line that goes around the grading, the areas of the.
Is that the entire driveway?
Yeah, that's the entire driveway.
And I think one of Susan's questions is that the plans that we have are not to scale, so it's difficult to ascertain the actual width of the driveway, the width beyond the driveway needed for the check dams and erosion control measures, and your limit of disturbance is fairly wide in some areas. So can you give us a little bit more information on how much width we're actually talking about?
Yes.
During.
So I have a scale drawing here. So
Excellent. Thank you.
If I hold it like this, so this area right here is going to be a cut, and then this side would be a fill. So this width at a 30 scale is just under 90 feet, and that's at station. That's between station 250 and 350. That's that first bulge that you see.
Madam Chair, to answer Susan's question, as you enter this driveway, you see the detention basin just to the west of the Do Not Disturb Ministerial Road buffer. And just as you pass by that detention basin, on the left-hand side of the driveway is grading associated with a side slope and fill area for that driveway. And that is, Susan, I'm just going to move my cursor in that area. So this is side slope grading associated with some fill and the construction of the driveway. As you continue to drive in a westerly pattern, as the engineer has testified, to the left is a cut. So that is cut into the embankment. This area in the driveway is lower than the southerly property line. The northern side is a fill. So in essence, it's cutting from the southern side, placing the material on the northern side to stabilize that embankment. As you head further west, it's a cut and a cut into the bank. And then you continue westerly. As you turn the corner and head in a north back to the north, there's a slight fill associated with the side slope of that curvature. So again, the first area is almost a balanced cut and fill. The second area is a cut. So trying to drive you from east to west through the driveway so you can understand the cut and fills associated with the driveway. I know it's difficult looking at a one-dimensional drawing and envisioning it in 3 dimensions.
And then once you get to station 6, that's where you're almost following the topography.
Yeah, I think, just listening to Susan, and I sort of wondered about this earlier. So you're putting in this subsurface material, this erosion control, to stabilize the banks. And what's it going to be planted with? I mean, I'm thinking right now it's probably mostly rhododendrons and... Mount Laurel. Can that be replanted, or will that material that you're putting down support that, or is this going to be lawn?
I mean, I think you want it as like a meadow mix or a mix that you don't have to do a lot of maintenance on, just have it grow kind of wild. I think trees and it might disturb the netting or the permanent erosion control, the roots.
Well, rhododendrons are very shallow rooted, and they are very well adapted to the entire length of the roadway, thus the scenic roadway status. So that may be something to be considered.
Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking about maintaining the overall look and feel of what's there now, if possible, with the erosion control that you need to put in to stabilize it all. So,
Well, I also wonder how well something like meadow mix would take. If you were not cutting all the trees, you're going to have theoretically a canopy there, which would potentially limit lawn or meadow mix from growing along the driveway, unless you're planning to cut the trees way back from the driveway. I would think you'd have too much shade for either meadow mix or lawn to grow along there. But you'll need some kind of something that can thrive in shade, unless you're taking off the canopy.
Well, I mean, we're going to be clearing to that solid dotted line and matching the grade there. So you'd have to specify a grass that could grow in the shade.
So that entire dotted line would be filled with your lawn or meadow mix, that, like, no part of that you're proposing to replant with native shrubberies or trees or other?
I was just planning on seeding it, hydroseeding it.
That soil is also very sandy, right? It's going to be extremely well drained.
It's well drained, yes. And that part is a cut, so we're not filling it, so it won't make it as it won't be as erosive, subject to erosion.
I just think that it's going to be difficult to get roots established there that don't like to be growing in gravel. It is.
Yeah. Well, another reason why
rain, right?
Yeah. Well, another reason why I put the permanent mat down, that would protect the slopes.
Right. If the grasses take there.
Right, but I mean, it's if the grasses grow, it takes a year or two to grow. These mats are not they're a permanent mat, so they're made to stay there for a long period of time.
Understood, but the soil below it is extremely well drained.
Yes.
Again, the mats. Thinking of watering the slopes, I mean, how are you going to keep the grass alive?
Are we concerned about seeing the driveway or from Ministerial Road? I'm just trying to understand your concern. Because the only way I think you're going to see it is if you fly over in a helicopter.
It seems as though the concern is not so much with the view shed from any particular angle, but for the long-term stability of the driveway and the impact on the cut and fill. I think that's where the questions are coming from.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Staff can work with the applicant to clarify seed mixes. There are a variety of mixes that are extremely shade tolerant. If it's well-drained soil, they may have to explore doing more than a 3-inch organic layer of loam on top of that sandy or soily material, but there are specific seed mixtures associated with different varieties of scenarios. Black Beauty Shade Master Mix is a very shade tolerant. It's actually used by our turf farms in North Kingstown and South Kingstown as a shade tolerant turf grass, and has been used successfully throughout the Northeast Corridor. So again, it may be looking at some additional detail. The soil and erosion control mat is not one measure that replaces the establishment of turf grass. So the only thing I would potentially rebut on the engineer's testimony tonight is that turf mat is not a standalone product. That turf mat is there as a measure to allow your vegetation to establish and develop a root zone while it's being subject to erosion given the slope. So they work in conjunction with each other, not independent of each other. So The erosion mat, in essence, is there as a mechanism to allow turf to establish during that susceptible period of growth. Again, there are ways to establish this. To Mr. DeStefano's point, where this cut and fill begins is almost 300 feet from Ministerial Road. So, unless you stood on Ministerial Road and looked internal to this, you're in essence looking from end zone to end zone on a football field with regards to distance. Our subdivision regulations don't necessarily discuss landscape measures associated with single-family site development, such as this in the subdivision realm. This isn't part of a subdivision road or anything other than single-family. So, again, I appreciate the planning board's comments, and staff is more than willing to work with the applicant on solidifying the turf grasses that are appropriate for this type of development in this setting.
And just to add to that, that's why I asked the question about the erosion control mat. They come in different configurations with different materials, and despite the fact that some of them have a poly weave throughout them, the filler can be undermined if not properly maintained, or there's no vegetation that comes up in a timely manner. So, again, if you have a significant storm, that can be an issue. Paul?
Yeah, I would just say it's not even so much about the view, is that the moraine is kind of a unique habitat, and that mountain laurel rhododendron combination, it's there now on steep slopes. It should be possible to reestablish it. Whether or not the neighbors will see it, I don't know how much of a buffer they have. It looks like the neighboring house is relatively close to the property line. I guess we don't see a landscaping plan in this type of application. So I would just, if there's any way to say that we would like to see native vegetation reestablished once the driveway is constructed, I would be in favor of that.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions at this point? This is a public hearing. I do want to read, we had an email from an abutting property owner with a request to read this into the record, as she could not be here this evening. This is, it was sent to Jay Parker, principal planner. Dear Jay, when first reviewing the revised plan for the Hemmerly subdivision, I was pleased to see that the applicant had proposed combining the proposed driveway with that existing as access into the former home of Lee Hemmerly. I agree with and support the request for waivers for the required frontage and the shared access easement, in that this solution will cause the least amount of physical disturbance and traffic confusion along Ministerial Road. However, when I looked at the plans available for review online, I was left thinking the proposed driveway itself presents an incredible amount of reconstruction of the existing topography. To flatten the driveway, which is proposed to facilitate the ascent of a steep east-facing slope, requires extensive excavation and reconstruction, which is not limited to the path of the driveway, but also requires regrading to the north and south, as well as retaining walls on the abutting northerly property line. There is no mention made as to whether blasting of large glacial boulders, should they be encountered, will be necessary. As a result, the proposed subdivision is not protecting the character of the existing natural environment, nor is it integrating well into the natural characteristics of the surrounding neighborhood. It is stated in the town's comprehensive plan that the town recognizes the value of the preservation of the unique geologic features of South Kingstown. The steep topography of Broad Hill is certainly one of those unique features found within the glacial moraine of Matunic Hills. In looking at topography mapping elements across the town, this proposed driveway appears to be a first for making such a vertical ascent of a steep slope. For these reasons, I find the proposal to be an excessive alteration of the land. Although I understand the need for the plan presented to focus on the driveway construction, there is no proposed grading depicted for the proposed house, which itself will not conform to the existing topography. Together, both elements present major reconstruction of the existing topography. I would like to ask that the applicant correct on the plan the spelling of my name and my mother's name. Both family names are Leeson, not Lesson, as is written on the plan sent out in the public notice package, and this is from Hope Leeson. So based on a couple of the questions in this letter, are there, and I think Susan asked this question, are there retaining walls planned within the site or not?
Yes, there are.
Can you point those out to us and give us the approximate dimensions?
Let's see, they're at... Right along that northerly property line where Mr. Rabbit's pointing to. And there's a small one right at the corner of the lot line just to the west of that.
And what materials are going to be, will this retaining wall be comprised of? Or are they just
on-site boulders.
Okay.
The lower wall is only maybe 4 or 5 feet at its highest point. Maybe 2 feet down towards the east. And that was to, again, prevent any encroachment, not only encroachment, but the area of disturbance outside of that. I was trying to minimize the disturbance within as best I could.
Understood. Thank you. If there are no further questions from board members, this is a public hearing. Is there anyone who would like to speak to this application? Please come up to the mic and state your name for the record.
Hello, thank you for your time. My name is Donna Wallace, and I'm here with my husband.
Scott Wallace.
And we are on the northern border. We abut this property. Our plat number is 74, and our parcel is number 6. We are the property that abuts this, and that the new dwelling will be the closest to. So we have 2 major concerns that we would like to look at today. One is the protection of the slope and the location of the home, and the second is the visibility from Ministerial Road. I'll start with the visibility from Ministerial Road. I respectfully disagree with the statement that the house will not be seen from Ministerial Road. We live, if you come up, we are in that private development with those lots A, B, C, D, E, and all of our houses are not on the ridge. When we built them, we specifically built them back from the ridge. Ours ranges from 20 to 50 feet, so we did not disturb the ridge. Every house that's on there did not disturb the ridge. We are set back. And in the winter, when the deciduous trees, or even in the fall when they start to shed their leaves right through the winter and the spring, all of the homes up there are visible. Due to the fact that they're set back a bit, though, on the ridge, they're not on the ridge, they have a lot of peekaboo views. Some are more visual than others, but not one is set on the ridge, almost hanging over the ridge. That will definitely be in view, especially when you are traveling north on the road. When you look at the topography, you'll see that most of it is flat, and then it's straight up, and the house will sit up. I do believe Ministerial is at 110 feet above sea level, and this structure is going to be at about 174 feet, plus the house is going to be maybe 3,200 square feet approximately, and has the ability to be 35 feet in height. So that will definitely be seen from Ministerial Road, especially traveling north. You can see the houses from Ministerial Road. I've been driving that road for 23 years. So I do respectfully disagree with that. And the other concern that we have with the topography and the ridge is the fact that the ridge has this incredible, beautiful natural vegetation that is well developed. And it solidifies the banks. It is all of the natural vegetation that you have been talking about this entire time. I actually, unfortunately, because the area is so private up there with the ridge, you don't have access to it. I do have some pictures of what the ridge looks like because we abut that property. So I'm not sure if you'd like to see them, but I did take a few pictures so you can see the establishment of the vegetation on this ridge. It's extensive and it's beautiful. The house that's being proposed right now actually sits over the ridge, and it's hard for me to tell, maybe 12 feet or so, and that's the existing foundation of that home. That doesn't include any structures that may be higher than the foundation level, so I'm not sure if the existing structure will hang over the ridge a little bit more or not. And the type of soil, the Gloucester soil that's there, is supportive for what we have with the drainage, for what the natural vegetation is. So I'm not sure. I know you're willing to work with them, but the first thought, obviously, is the visual from the street. Respectfully disagree with that being there so long. And I know, according to our rules and regulations here that we have for town ordinances, you know, the buffer is basically the first 50 feet. And the buffer is meant to be a visual for people on the road to see. But I truly do not think that that addresses the Matunic Highlands, as they're called, closer to the southern end of that road. The Highlands give people the opportunity for an incredible view. At the same time, we want to preserve the integrity of that scenic highway, and we also want to preserve the vegetation on that scenic road and just that natural, beautiful area. When I went back and I looked at the stewardship plan, which I'm sure you're all aware of, it doesn't specify that it's just a buffer. It specifies that it's there. I will read one, and I do know that these are not ordinances, and that these are more, let me see, what's the word? They're to be considered, and they have been adopted by the South Kingstown Town Council and should be considered when we're looking at property on Ministerial Road. But they talk about maintaining the road's residential character, to control the visual and the traffic impacts. It's more the visual that we are looking at. Originally, I don't think there was a big concern about this area because the hills really, when this was built, they had a low potential site for building just due to what we are looking at now. But now that, you know, this is 20 years later or so, and we have more technology, we have more ability and more research that's available. But one of the biggest things that we want to look at is to preserve this. And right in on the stewardship plan, it states, for development projects that will move ahead, encouraging consideration of the site planning approaches that minimize the visual impacts of new development on the corridor. So we just wanted you to be aware of that. So the other piece that I'm looking at here also on the site map, you can see how the house hangs over, but also when a new principal or accessory structure is proposed, existing vegetation along the street is minimal or absent, and such new construction will be visible from the highway due to lack of vegetation, topography, or site characteristics. Planting of a natural vegetation landscape buffer containing plants that are consistent with this existing ministerial native plant species, and that will provide a year-round screen, shall be required. Now, that can be very difficult to put on a bank. One of the questions that we have is when we look at the topography here in the plan, one of the things we have is why on the ridge? Why are we looking at destroying the beauty and the integrity of the ridge? That's one of our biggest questions that we have. Why are we doing that? And that is, that ridge is visible from Ministerial Road. The corridor is not just a forward visual in front of the car. It's just a whole visual. It has canopies and everything, and it's gorgeous this time of year. So, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I'd just like to add.
Just speak a little closer.
Yeah, we bought the land in 1998. I'm sorry, 1996, and we built the house in 1998. That was before this flexible frontage went into effect. Yep. One of the things we asked our realtor when we bought the land, who owned the land next to us? One of the reasons we liked the lot, because it had open space next to us. And she said that was a Hemmerly property. There was one lot on it, and they could not build on top of it. So that's one of the reasons we bought that. Now, our house will sit about, well, the new house, proposed house, will sit 100 feet from our property line. There are no evergreen trees between us and them. Most of our land is our lawn. So we will definitely see the house, no doubt, especially when there's no leaves on the trees.
Thank you.
I would like to just show you what the
Yes, please,
topography looks
if you
like.
give them to Robin, she can pass them. Oh, you don't have them. I see.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
If they are shown, we need copies of them for distribution this evening.
Yes.
We cannot take digital files.
We need copies of those in order
No, tonight.
tonight, like right now.
Tonight. No. No. Madam Chair, I'll defer to
Mike
council.
is not picking up your comments at this moment. So unless you have a printed handout, it's not anything that we can.
Okay. Before the meeting ends, is that correct?
Before the hearing
Before this particular portion of the meeting ends.
Well, I'm not sure if it's that important. I think everyone is aware of the beauty on Ministerial Road. And I just want to make one more point. I know I have talked to a few people, and it keeps coming back down to the visual 50-foot easement on the road, but that does not apply to the Matunic Hills. And when that was written, most of the thought was the property that had higher potential really was not in the hills. And it does not state that is specific just for the barrier. That's just an example. So thank you for your time.
Yes, thank you. You are correct. And you can certainly ascertain from the questions that have been asked so far this evening that board members are very concerned with the buffer that is a requirement, and that is an area with which we do have jurisdiction. However, we don't have jurisdiction over any visibility to or from the neighbors on adjacent.
It's not so much the neighbors either. It's really more so you will definitely see this from the road, and it has been stated in the original submission of the plan and the most recent that it will not be seen from the road, and that is not true. Every house is seen from the road. It has some impact or another.
Of course.
And this house will have the most impact hanging over the ridge.
Yes.
So.
And we only have so much regulatory authority, as you know, because you've done your research.
Yes.
Thank you.
I do know that, but it needs to be taken into consideration because you should consider the stewardship plan too. So,
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes
Also,
to?
I just want to.
Oh.
I believe I read that if it is visible from the road, it needs to be screened. And I don't see how, with that house hanging over the ridge, how are they going to screen that from the road?
I believe the language relates to, and Jamie or Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, to garages being visible from the road, not the houses themselves.
Garages that are visible from the road are supposed to have their garage doors in a north or south orientation so they do not face the street. If that can't be accomplished, they're supposed to be buffered.
And the other concern I have, with the house being over top of the ridge, the amount of material that will need to be removed to put that foundation there, they'll be way over the ridge. How are they going to control that erosion?
That is an engineering question, best answered by the engineer. I believe that our engineering DPS has looked at that, and TRC has looked at that. Rich, I don't know if you have any comments relative to the actual stability of the placement of the house.
The house, no, but the driveway we've looked at, but the house we have not looked at. We'll look at that when the building permit is requested, and at that time we'll, work with the building official to make sure it meets our requirements.
And the other thing, out of the 5 houses that we have, 4 of them are on that ridge. The other one faces another direction. Like my wife said, all of us are set back from the ridge. I would like to, if they're going to allow this house, I would like to see it in line with the other houses on the ridge to keep with the character of the neighborhood, which they will kind of become part of. Like I said, 4 of them are set back, and theirs is going to be over top. and that just doesn't fit with what's there now. So
Certainly, that's
I would like
a
that to be
question.
considered too.
Yes, that's a question that can be asked of the engineer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I'd just point out that the five-lot subdivision to the north has its own development restrictions that were placed on it by the developer that include view shed restrictions. So, yes, they're set up the way they are, but that's restrictions from that particular development.
Thanks, Brian. Mr. Dunn, having heard some of these comments, are you able to give us a little more information about any flexibility that might be available as far as the placement of the house?
I haven't discussed that with my client regarding the placement, although there was quite a lot of testimony from some of the neighbors about the location and its visibility from the road. That proposed house is directly behind the one that's on Ministerial Road in front of it. The house is going to be about 700 or 800 feet off the road. That's going to be quite a way. And the house in front of it is pretty well landscaped and heavily wooded as well. So this idea that it's going to be this obtrusive view and that's going to impact the neighborhood in a very adverse way, I think is a gross overstatement. But what I would say is no, we haven't discussed the placement. We'd like to place it right where it is.
Can I comment on that?
Sure.
The existing house that you just mentioned is at elevation 95. The house that's proposed is at 174. So, yeah, it is considerably higher. The house in front, even with landscape, isn't going to block it.
There's still, yeah, but behind the house that already exists, there is a lot of tree growth, and that's still going to be there. That's not going anywhere.
Okay.
As the slope goes up, the tree line goes up as well.
I want to see if there's anyone else who wishes to speak first, and then you can certainly come up. At this point, are there any additional questions for the applicant or the applicant's engineer from board members?
I'd like to make one little...
Certainly.
I'd like to make one little comment, which I think is irrelevant to the conversation and maybe a little nitpicky, but I did receive a whole packet of information from y'all that says that your applicant is paying right now $28,000 in town taxes. And I'd like to point out that none of us are paying $28,000 a year in taxes on our $400,000 house. So I don't know who did your bad math, but I just wanted to point out that somewhere in here, when it talks about the benefits and the costs of new building in town, it has your two properties, potentially if you build a new one, paying a combined $50,000 in town taxes, which isn't a thing. So I just wanted to make a notation about that being my nitpicky correction to your paperwork. So thanks.
Ms. Wallace, please. And just restate your name, please, for the record.
Donna Wallace. So when we look at the slope on that area, even with the existing vegetation coming up the slope, it will still show the home. The other question that I have is how much of the slope, the vegetation on the slope for the house is going to be removed and replaced with grasses?
And are you specifically referring to the vegetation adjacent to the house rather than the driveway, as that question was already asked?
I am referring to the vegetation on the slope, yes. Where the steepest slope, where the home will be. That is truly the steepest and main slope going up.
Thank you. Is this a question that your engineer can answer? And in addition to any flexibility in terms of the location of the house?
Sure. So when I put this together, I didn't look at the grading of the house. but typically it depends on the style of house, type of foundation that's going to be there. Is it a stepped foundation? Is it going to have a walkout? Some of those questions are kind of premature because those are developed as you get a building permit and you start that process. But the grading may involve some further walls or stepped foundations to minimize the clearing and the cut into that area.
Thank you. As you know, once the board issues an approval or denial, that's it. And unless there's a major change to a plan, we don't have any other comments that we can make or conditions that we can impose. Jamie, I think we all understand that although this is a special situation in that it's within a scenic roadway, it is a 2-lot subdivision as opposed to a 10-lot subdivision, and how there is significant site disturbance. The slopes are somewhat challenging. Just wondering if this is something that needs another look. Should there be a site visit? Is there potential for any inherent flexibility based on the location for the house?
So, Madam Chair, I think the testimony and discussion this evening was beneficial from both the public and staff's perspective. I have been on this site. I have personally reviewed the site plans. We have had conversations at the technical review committee level prior to this hearing. I think there may be some outstanding items that could be addressed in a little more detail by the applicant as it relates to turf selection and treatment, and maybe more specifically to the specific erosion control mat that was discussed this evening, and the potential for probably maybe some slight revegetation of those slopes with native species, but I would not have those answers for you this evening. Possibly you could continue the hearing to your next regularly scheduled meeting, and along with the applicant's counsel and their legal team, they could answer those questions. As you mentioned, this is a 2-lot subdivision, and you are driven by your regulatory authority contained within your regulations and within Rhode Island state law. And although there were a lot of good comments this evening, some of the items perhaps are not regulatory on the planning board side with regards to protecting ridgeline views. Some of the documents that were referenced are policy documents and guiding documents. They're not regulatory. For instance, if there was a regulation that said you cannot have a driveway over 10%, then you couldn't have a driveway over 10%. You do not have a regulation that limits driveway slope. You have some policy guidelines with regards to access. With regards to landscaping, the construction of a new house may be visible by an abutting property, but that new house will also be looking at that existing house. So neighborhoods change and evolve, and I think with regards to the discussion, the applicant may have some ability to address some of the concerns that the planning board brings up that are more regulatory in nature this evening. They also may have an opportunity to look at their site development and potentially address some of the issues that are not regulatory. Again, but that would require the continuation of this hearing to your next regularly scheduled meeting in July. No.
Thank you, Jamie. Paul?
Jamie, you said something about turf and some slight revegetation with native plants. Can we tighten that up a little bit in the discussion and look for a dense revegetation with the native mountain laurel and rhododendron?
The difficulty is looking
to the greatest extent possible.
Yeah, looking at the reestablishment of that. So you can't do one without the other, and you can't jeopardize one by doing something else. So, in my experience on revegetation of slopes that are 2-to-1 and 3-to-1, you can't go out and establish mature vegetation. So, going out and putting 5 or 6 foot tall mountain laurel in there is going to potentially shade and jeopardize the ability of that seed, which does need sunlight and does need temperature to establish itself. So you would start out with smaller plant material. Then that smaller plant material has to be maintained over time because it's going to compete with invasives. So there are a couple moving parts to the revegetation of that, but I think it's potentially something that the applicant can explore. But it's a fine balance between reestablishing turf to stabilize it from an erosion standpoint where the fines wash out and jeopardize the functionality of the detention basin the engineers designed at the entrance to this site, while you're trying to reestablish some of that native vegetation. But again, there could be an opportunity to reestablish that. And again, mountain laurel, once it starts, it's native and will expand.
Very slowly.
Thanks, Jamie.
Very slowly. I have to say that the waiver that's being asked is large. They have less than half of the amount of frontage they're supposed to have. And why do we want to go ahead and approve this when it's causing such great disturbance to an ecologically unique area? The glacial moraine and the ministerial rhododendrons and mountain laurels are unique, and so we're being asked to waive quite a lot of frontage, and also being asked to accept this very disruptive driveway. That leaves a lot of question in my mind as to, is this just so that the landowner gets to make more money and the heck with the land itself?
So, Madam Chair, if I could just clear, again, Robin, all good points. What the flexible design regulation allows is an alternative to the full development of the property, which this applicant includes in their application materials. The alternative is a cul-de-sac with potentially 3 lots that would have more ground disturbance than their proposal. So the intent of the regulations is to look at an alternative to a full build-out of the property, which requires the construction of a road. So you're weighing factors associated with a full build-out and the construction of a small cul-de-sac versus utilizing flexible frontage where they don't need to build a cul-de-sac and they're trying for 2 lots. And again, I'm not taking a stance on whether a cul-de-sac and multiple lots is better or whether the flexible design is better. It is an alternative allowed under our regulation.
And how does the cul-de-sac fit our regulations then? How does that give them the frontage?
Robin, if you look on sheet 7 of 8, it shows what's called the yield plan. And that demonstrates that if the applicant were not to utilize the flexible frontage provisions, these are what used to be called hockey stick lots, you'll see when you look at the configuration. And if they can demonstrate to the board's satisfaction that they could put in a road cul-de-sac and create the necessary frontage, and that's where you see the 3 lots that Jamie was referring to.
And what page are you looking at?
On page 7, sheet 7 of 8, there's 2 sets of plans. Do you want to hand?
Yeah, Robin, this is the front page of the one you were looking at. And it's the last page.
So generally, the flexible frontage works so that you have less disturbance and you'll see a shared driveway, and it allows for less intrusion on a property. That is the idea behind, and so they have to demonstrate that with a yield plan.
Well, that is going to, so where do the driveways come off of the cul-de-sac? Are they still going over the ridge, or are they short driveways?
No. They just need to demonstrate that it's possible to build this.
Well, okay, I concede that. But 2 houses versus 3 houses versus all that ecological disruption.
Right, no, understood. I understood your point. To that end, would someone like to make a motion to continue this public hearing to our next regular meeting, which would be July the... Do we have a...
July 26th, Madam Chair.
26th.
I'll make a motion to continue the public hearing to our next regular meeting on July
26th.
July 26th.
We have a motion.
Madam Chair, you have a motion on the table.
Yes, we have a partial motion on the floor. We can explain it to you once we have a discussion.
I'll second that motion.
So we have a motion from Paul. We have a second from Susan. Any further discussion? And to clarify, this would mean that this item is continued to our next regular meeting, which is on July 26th. The public hearing is still open. Therefore, it means that the public can speak to this and any potential changes that may occur in the interim.
Madam Chair, you have a motion and a second on the table.
Correct.
Public comment would be inappropriate at this time.
You needed to come up about 2 minutes ago.
Yeah, she's the applicant, she's the owner.
Oh.
Okay.
Is that all right?
Is there still a motion? If the motion was withdrawn.
You could withdraw it
second
and
was
you
withdrawn.
could renew it.
Paul, would you like to redraw your motion?
Yeah, I'll withdraw the motion.
Thank you.
Draw the second.
I'll redraw my second.
Thank you.
Please state your name.
Thank you. Sorry, this is Kim Jones.
Kim Jones.
And my question, I just wanted clarification for what would be gained by another month of engineering plans, and what is it that you want to see at the next meeting?
I think that the board has made it very clear that they have some questions relative to the site disturbance, to the drainage and erosion potential, the degree of clearing, the retaining walls, and potential for the adjustment of the house location or not, to be discussed at the staff level between the applicant and the staff. And we have found that generally having these kinds of communications allows for a better outcome ultimately, based on the questions and comments from the board and from the members of the public.
That's fine. I don't mean to be disrespectful or anything, but I do know we went through the TRC. I felt like it went smoothly there, and I felt like the engineer answered a lot of questions. So is it additional items that...
Well, the TRC is advisory in nature only. They do not make the decision. The planning board makes the decision. So that's sort of a staff level type of a meeting with one duty planning member attending. So again, it's the planning board that makes the decision and tries to be very thorough in all of its deliberations.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Paul.
Motion to continue the public hearing to our next regular meeting on July 26th.
Motion from Paul.
I'll second that.
Second from Susan. Is there further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Motion carries.
Madam Chair, just for clarity, that meeting is July 26th, 7 p.m. in Town Council chambers.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, folks. Our next agenda item is public hearing, major multi-household land development, preliminary plan, Magnolia Lane. Is there anyone representing the applicant?
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. William Landry of Bush and Kavanaugh,
Representing the applicant, J. Thomas Investments, Mr. D'Agostino is here. Mr. Russo from Dupree Engineering is here. We're pretty close on the heels to the master plan approval on this project. It was just entered back in late March of this year. It usually takes a little longer for an applicant to be at preliminary, but this one was unusual in that the DEM approvals were secured before we even came to you at the master plan level. They go back to when the northern part of Magnolia Lane was developed. The DEM stormwater design was completed in 2018. There was an original DEM permit from 2016 that was revised in 2019 and recently renewed in March of 2022, just a couple of months ago. So there was not a requirement to go and pursue any state permitting. The master plan level hearing, as you recall, took several tries to come to conclusion. At the beginning, it started pretty benignly at the TRC with some recommended landscape enhancements to the northeast corner of our parcel to protect it, to create a visual screen from Oak Street and the abutting properties. We've got a 56,000 square foot lot. You'll recall that we're here under the land designation of 2 household detached structure. And we're proposing 2 structures, each with 2 condominium units on this lot. It's zoned R10, high density residential lot that has access to both water and sewer and is fully permitted by DEM and approved for that sewer connection. Most of the infrastructure has actually been installed in connection with that other development. As we got into the hearing process itself, there were questions raised from abutters about the density and how it corresponded to what's permitted for multifamily in the R10 zone. There were some definitive series of calculations that became more definitive along the way that determined and reflected then in staff reports and now in the staff report for tonight that there's 28,578 square feet of developable, suitable land, and that under the R10 multifamily formula that would permit 4.72 dwellings. We're requesting, now I'm proposing 4 dwellings, and 4 were approved at the master plan level. There was also some discussion about the open space that's required, the 10% open space. The regulation speaks in terms of open area that can be part of a rear yard, a front yard, a side yard. In a condominium development like this, it really encompasses everything except the foundations and the envelope of the buildings themselves. We were asked at the end of the last stage to identify a particular apron around these 2 buildings that would definitively show a highly suitable area for this open space to occur. Now, it's much less than the open space that's being made available, but that apron alone is 3,719 feet, so it comprises 13% of the lot, well in excess of the required 10%. There are drainage facilities to the rear of the lot that serve not only this property, but other properties on Magnolia Lane and assist with stormwater retention for the entire neighborhood, which has been an issue over the years. We're not seeking any waivers tonight. We respectfully believe that no waivers were ever actually required. The planning board granted a frontage waiver at the master plan stage for the buildings to be 47 feet back from the street and not 100 feet back. But at as we learned at the master plan stage, that's a planning requirement that's overcome by the more recent zoning ordinance, which provides for a 25-foot setback for this use in the R10 zone, which we well exceed. And most of that setback area is outside of and in addition to what's being proposed as the defined apron of open space. But all of the area outside of the buildings will be common area for the condominium. This time around at TRC, there was a good question raised as to whether we can narrow the roadway width at the entrance. It's 20 feet now for the driveway. That's an NFPA requirement for access to the house. The fire marshal, fire official Chris Hanna was at the TRC meeting, and when asked if from a fire safety point of view that could be narrowed further, he was not supportive of that. It would have been fine for us to reduce the width of that driveway, but that would put it below NFPA requirements. We've reviewed the 9 conditions in the project summary staff report. They're all acceptable to the applicant. Most of them involve ensuring that at the final plan stage there are board-approved condominium documents and restrictions and association documents that incorporate operation and maintenance plans that are part of our stormwater approvals, and that those documents be dealt with at that stage. So unless there are any questions of me, I'm going to hand the green cards over to the planning department representatives and ask Dave Russo, the project engineer, to come up and briefly summarize the key engineering aspects of the project.
And before you leave, I just wanted to make a brief statement in that, as you know, since you've been involved from the master plan stage, this has been a very peculiar project in that it is adjacent to a set of lots that were not reviewed by the planning board due to a 1940s era subdivision, and therefore the normal degree of scrutiny was not part of the process. Then this particular lot and the issue with the waiver or not made things a little bit more confusing for many, including the fact that although this is a separate project from the more northerly set of lots, it does share a detention pond, and there have been a lot of questions relative to the development of the site as a whole. So I just wanted to reiterate that, which I'm sure you understand. Looking at the site plan, you reference the open space, which when you look at the plan, it's a little bit elusive. So just want to make that statement as we go forward and continue this conversation.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure what it means. They're very clearly identified there, the open space area. I mean, the open space is everywhere. So the real answer is everything that's not part of the building is available to all of the unit owners. But we're asked to provide an apron at least around the units. That's not all of the open space, but that's just some of it. And just that some of it is a third more than is required under the regulations.
I think when we talk about open space, we're not necessarily talking about shared recreational yard space. And this site really doesn't have any open space. I mean, there's the wetland that you can't build in, but it's not what I think of when I think of open space.
Well, it's what the
regulations
says.
I understand that.
Open space can be it is not all wetlands, and it's not all wetlands buffer. This is all suitable land area, and it's 13% of the suitable land area on the site, not 13% of the gross land area, and it squarely does meet the regulation.
I understand it fits the definition. I think it's a definition we need to address. One more question, and maybe this is a better question for the engineer, but looking at the plan, the driveway is shown as being 16 feet wide up to the lot line where it expands to 20 feet. Is that a mistake on the plan, or does it go from 16 to 20?
It looks a little narrower. I had the same question when I looked at it tonight, so I'll let Mr. Russo respond to that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is David Russo, professional engineer with Dupree Engineering. I'll answer that question just to start. But that driveway was designed to 16 feet coming off the roadway. At the TRC meeting, that was one of Mr. Axelrod's comments, if we could narrow the whole driveway down. The applicant was willing to do it. When we drew that originally, we were with the intent of keeping it as narrow as we could through that area, but speaking with fire and the multifamily units, they want that whole stretch to be 20 feet. So we'll have to modify that on the final plans. Just stepping back on the master plan, these plans haven't changed much since the master plans. That's due to the comments and the back and forth that we had. We had multiple meetings with staff on that. So the plans that are submitted today are the same plans that were approved at master plan with very, very minor modifications. The parking spaces, there was 2 parking spaces along the entrance as you came in off that driveway that were requested to be removed, which we have taken off. There was a question, there was a swale located on the southern side of those 2 crushed stone parking spaces. And there's a question whether that was designed for a 100-year storm event. And we went back and looked at that, and we felt that that swale would actually cause more issues than good. So we actually just graded that area down to the pond and made it more accessible to be utilized as a lawn area, easier to maintain. It really found it not to be necessary in that short span down to the pond area. The other, I don't really want to call this a change because it didn't change from master plan to preliminary, but at TRC, there was a question on the landscaping, and I just want to clarify that landscaping, there's a lot of back and forth with the board during the master plan, and that landscaping has been modified. There was a comment that it looked very unnatural, I'll say, like very just, I forgot the wording they used, but our landscape architect did go back, revise all of that. One of the items that one of the members of TRC wasn't aware of was there's actually a fence that's proposed along that property line also. That's going to be a solid white fence on the property line, and then you'll have that 10 feet of landscaping inside of our property. It was probably missed at the TRC meeting because the planning staff brought it up to us today that it's actually not labeled.
Yes, you can't see it on the plan.
It's not labeled on the site. The site plan defers to the landscape plan, and it's not labeled on either plan. But the intent is, and the applicant is agreeing to put the fence in that area. We can add that label to the final plan. But that will be a solid fence, and then you'll have the landscaping in front. The other change during the master plan that we think was significant was the original units on this that were approved by DEM. The total of those was closer to 6,600 square feet. The applicant, and this was again part of the master plan, did reduce the size of the units. Those are actually down to, the total is about 4,250 square feet now. So, that area, the unit size, because there was a concern about the bulk and the size of it. So that has been reduced, and that's actually almost 10% of the usable area. So that is a significant reduction. I know it doesn't look it when you have this small piece of land, but it is a big reduction in the actual usable area out there. The other items that were discussed with planning staff is we talked to fire. Fire actually, just to clean the record, fire actually wasn't, Mr. Landry wasn't at the TRC. They actually weren't at that TRC. We talked to them after, and they gave us that correspondence about the 20-foot width. And then the other 2 items we just recently submitted to planning was the water and the sewer basically the approvals from the original roadway design when that was all approved, because it was, as you stated, it was kind of an awkward approval process where the roadway design was approved and it wasn't going through the full land development. So we did hand those in, so it does have all its approvals for sewer, water. And then just to lastly address the comment about how it was designed, and the lots to the north were taken into consideration. The stormwater report for this was one of the more intense off-site stormwater reports we've ever done, because a lot of the drainage from Cleveland Street discharges into this low-lying area. So we actually had to go back and analyze the watersheds that go to Cleveland Street, and then we had to compensate. So this drainage is in my opinion, if you were just looking at this in a box, all this is oversized to handle a lot of off-site drainage that comes into this area. And that went through a really long review process with DEM, especially with the town engineers, and a lot of back and forth. So that did go through that process. It was analyzed as a whole in terms of engineering. I know it didn't go through the planning process.
Thank you for that. And as you know, from a planning perspective, if the site had been developed as a whole, that may have changed the design, the number of affordable units, and so
Sure.
on. So a little bit of an odd situation for the board, this one.
Understood.
Questions for Mr. Russo? I am wondering, Brian, Jamie, can you advise us of our flexibility with regard to road widths? For example, residential compounds, I believe, have a lower allowance for road width. Do we have any flexibility here, since the applicant is willing to decrease the road width, which generally is less disturbance and savings for an applicant?
The key aspect, Madam Chairman, Jamie Rabbit, Planning Director, is the reference Attorney Landry made to the National Fire Protection Code, which I believe states for any multifamily type housing that it's a minimum of 20 feet with regards to access to those. So if you were to contemplate any motion, the language that I had just amended as the discussion went on, that these site plans should be amended to reflect the minimum of a 20-foot wide access strip. We can add the language unless the fire marshal approves something less than that to be no less than required by the National Fire Protection standards. But again, my understanding of that, working on many multifamily housing projects, is 2 10-foot lanes of a minimum 20-foot width.
So this is only with regard to multifamily, because I don't recall us in the past having any kind of national fire protection authority with regard to our...
Because this is 4 units, I believe it falls under that category.
So it's because it's multifamily.
Yes. But again, we, as a staff, on your behalf, could add a sentence to a particular condition that allows that flexibility, so long as it's allowed by the code.
I see. Thanks, Jamie. And before we continue, I know that there was an email that staff sent out. Not all board members got it, and I do not have a copy of it, and I don't think, I know Lynn made some copies from the Hemmerly comments, but we didn't get the ones from...
Mrs. Lima's letter?
Excuse me?
Mrs. Lima?
Yes, I believe that was...
There's some photographs there, too. I'd like to see those get addressed.
The copy you made was just for Hemmerly. I don't have it. No, this is the one. This is Hemmerly. This is what she gave us. Yeah, this is Hemmerly. This is what you gave us.
This is from Lima. I can read this if you want. We don't have the photos.
We can bring the photos up, Madam Chair.
You could put the photos up, right?
Yes. You bear with me.
But it would be helpful for the entire board to be able to see what was in the letter.
If you give me a moment, Madam Chair.
Sure.
We'll look for that email.
Meanwhile, I had asked at one time how large that wetland actually was. Did anybody get an answer for me on that?
Dave Russo, Dupree Engineering. It's on the plans under.
Not on your property, but the wetland.
Oh, the offsite. We don't have that flagged because we can't go on there.
Yeah, I'm very curious as to how close did it come to a better buffer.
New wetland regs will have it.
Robin, what area are you talking about?
The wetland that is less than 3 acres. I'd like to know, was it 2.9 acres?
Right.
How big was it really?
Understood, because it's jurisdictional, right? If it's, greater than.
So, Madam Chair, I do have the photographs from the email that was received by our office.
Okay. And do you have the letter? Wow.
It's worth reading.
Everybody finished with the second paragraph? Everyone set with this set paragraphs? Okay. Go ahead. now the photos make more sense. Can you go to the photos? Right, yes.
Madam Chair, those are the last photos.
Thanks, Jamie. And it would be useful, I think, for the board to have printed copies of this, especially those of us who did not receive the email. I'm assuming Ms. Lima would like to speak tonight. Would you like to come up to the mic? This is a public hearing.
Thank you. Barbara Lima, 70 Oak Street in Wakefield. You know that I have since September been saying that this site cannot support the 4 units. My understanding is it's been approved at the past level, and so the density has been approved. But I think we all realize that there was a problem with the way that the square footage was calculated. And to say that the area that's below that drainage pond counts toward what he can build when he can't build there, that doesn't make sense. And I know that you're working on clarifying your regulations and guidelines, and that hopefully you will be given as much latitude as the applicants are, because they're allowed to consider the peculiar conditions associated with the land. You also should be allowed to consider the peculiar conditions, which in this case is counting stuff he can't use. And so, taking to heart that we're going to move forward with this project, I wanted you to know and understand what we as abutters have been, and we've seen most of this because we're the corner lot. And so we have Magnolia Lane to our south, and we have Magnolia Lane to our west. And there have been issues going back to when our land was almost cleared by more than 8 feet because the surveyor's tags were on our property. Now, we contacted Mr. D'Agostino, and he came and helped, the tree clearer remove that faulty tag. But Mr. D'Agostino did come, and he said to us, if there are problems in the future, please don't go to the town, call me directly, and we'll work things out. And sometimes that worked, and sometimes, mostly it didn't. And so after hearing what you just said about the Hemmerly estate, it sounds like there isn't much that you can help us with to restore the loss of those 4 majestic tall trees that were destroyed when the excavator bucket came in, removed the roots, came onto our property. That was one of the photos. Removed the roots, and the trees all started leaning in toward our property. And Mr. D'Agostino did have them removed. It took about 10 months before that happened, and we were sweating out every storm that happened. But we also, that would have prevented us from seeing what's about to happen on Phase 2 of Magnolia Lane. And so we were wondering if there's anything that can be done to make it so that we don't have to see that project that we don't really believe should even be allowed to go forward. And if you look at the landscaping, and so we were hoping that it could be planted like right beyond our property or even on our property to replace the 4 that got removed because they were falling. But if not, at a minimum, what you may be, I'm trying to find things that you may be able to help us with. The landscaping plan is to the east and north. And could they do something comparable over on the other side, like below the filtration pond there, or something, just, again, to help with our visibility. And then the other issue was the soil erosion. You saw the pictures. That's what it looks like if you look at our property. That has been there for a very long time, since the excavator leveled out the land. And we asked the applicant, Mr. D'Agostino, several times to please put up a retaining wall. Every time it rains, we're losing a fraction of our property, because now our property is probably like this high, and that's, where the rest of the grading took place, whereas all the property used to be as high as ours, but now we have this berm at the end. And so I think that is something that could be a condition of moving forward, is to put in that retaining wall for us. If you look at the photo, it's actually, that thing is getting concave, and that's our property that's getting rained away every time there's a storm. So I think that's within your power. Now, we've been told by the town engineer, who we truly respect, and that it would have to be done before you approve the road. But every time it rains, we're losing property, so we would rather have that happen sooner rather than later. And then the last thing that I pointed out in the photos was the fact that the silt fence and that green sock filtration thing is on our property. They dug so close up to our property, they didn't even allow any space to put that thing where it should have been, which was around our property, not on our property. But if the retaining wall is put up, that thing could probably the silt fence and the fence could probably just be eliminated, because I don't know, since, as I said, we're higher up. And then if you look at the picture, the other thing that occurred to me when I did the picture, not after we'd already done the letter, was why is the hydrant like 2 feet off the ground there? I think that showed, I remember talking with the excavator crew, and they worked hard, that he was saying, I don't know how we're going to get we only have like 7 feet to connect between your property and where this hydrant is going to be. And it's not. It's like sticking way up in the ground. You can see that in the picture. So what we're asking is just if you could do what you can to help us out here, because we're going to be living with this, and there have been some things that happened that should not have happened, and anything that you can do to mitigate we're going to have to go through it again. 2 years of dust and 2 years of noise and 2 years of starting too early and working too late and working on holidays. 2 more years we're going to have of that, I guess. I don't know. That's how long it took for this one to be done. But we really appreciate that you have listened all these months. I've been coming to every single planning board, every single TRC where this was on the agenda, even when it was just continued in the hopes that maybe something would happen during the continuation things. Here we are. It's going to happen. So if you could help us reduce some of the damage that we have felt personally because of the project, we would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And do you have any questions? And I'm sorry you didn't get the email, and I'm sorry you had to use time during this meeting to read it.
Thank you for making us aware of the situation. The applicant is here. I don't know if he would like to speak to any of these. It's always better to have communication. So I think that's the way this board looks at it.
Sure. How you doing? I'm the owner applicant, John D'Agostino of J. Thomas Investments, the managing partner. As you know, there's two sides to every story.
Correct.
And I don't think that we're going to get into every aspect of it right here at a planning board meeting. I'm willing to work with Ms. Lima, but you have to be realistic too in terms of what you're looking to do. I spoke to Mr. Bourbonnais, and we're willing to get right on that retaining wall. He's aware of it. I'm aware of it. As far as the trees go, I hired a professional road building company approved by the town, insured, bonded, very professional, as Ms. Lima even said. She got them cold drinks and ice cream and really liked them. Those were the same guys that excavated down and did the road. And there were some roots that came onto our property. So when the excavator pulled up the roots, they damaged some trees. So we were willing to take those down. As you know, everyone was in a high demand. It was COVID time. It wasn't something that we could jump right on, but we did take care of it. We've been trying to be very accommodating to everybody. We've been trying to do everything we can. I think I got a pretty good relationship with all the other neighbors there. We've come to terms, and I think that for the most part, everyone's been happy. When I first started the project, Mr. and Mrs. Lima, or Mr. Lima came out and he said, I guess you're the one that purchased this property. I said, I am, sir. I said, you don't look too happy about that. He said, well, I'm not. I don't want to see this project go in. I said, I understand that. I said, you could buy it, jokingly, at this time. And he said, I'm not going to do that. I purchased the property. This is the way that the property was presented to me. I wasn't aware of how the lots got manipulated in the first phase of it. I was the same realtor that sold Miss Lima her house, sold this to me. When we were walking the property, he said, Miss Lima is aware of this project. She was aware of it when she bought the house. He informed me of that when we bought the property, just as a side note. So, to say the least, I'm a resident of South Kingstown. My kids go to school in South Kingstown. I'm honored to work in South Kingstown. I'm trying to do the best I can. We really are. So that's it. If anyone has any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you for your candor. The incursion on her property and the soil erosion and the loss of trees, is that something that can be mitigated right away?
As far as the loss of trees, I don't recall exactly how many there were. Mm-hmm. To my recollection, they were taller trees that I don't think created much of a buffer from a visual aspect. I think on the recommendation of the board and our requirements on that landscape buffer with the fencing, I think that alone would be enough to satisfy that. Maybe if we could compromise and reduce our landscape plan and maybe move some of those plantings over to her property or on the corner, I'd be willing to look at that. But I think that our package is pretty significant in terms of what we're calling out for the trees and that buffer already.
Okay, so my name is Susan, and I'm going to interrupt here.
Yep.
I'm sorry. You guys damaged her trees.
Not me. I hired a road contractor.
Your subcontractors damaged her trees. You kindly took them out for her, and now you're saying that they weren't a very good buffer for her anyway, so maybe we'll throw her some loam. And I think that she needs to be made whole. And I don't know what the...
So the roots came onto our property, so I don't know the legalities of that.
Of course they did, but...
So, and then, on retrospect, we just had a large limb that fell down and went into our swale, grass swale. We didn't contact Miss Lima. We took her limb, we cut it up, and we disregarded it. I allowed her landscapers to access her property from the rear. They came in with a skid steer machine and disrupted our swale that we reloomed and seeded. So it's not, it's two-sided here, so.
Okay, so, sorry. I'm seeing one side here. And I think that the Limas apparently have been pretty kind to you. They brought you ice cream. And so
Not me,
you're going to
ma'am.
throw
Not me.
them
The
some...
road contractors that damaged their trees, she brought ice cream to, so I'm not sure, how much of an issue it was at the time, so.
So are you recommending that she sue you to have replacement done for the things that you've damaged on her property, which apparently is ongoing?
I'm not sure how
your
this is-
erosion control is on her property.
I-
You would think
I
you would
said-
remove that tomorrow.
I said I would be willing, and I actually spoke to Mr. Bourbonnais prior to the meeting and said I wasn't aware of that, and if that's an issue, we will remove it tomorrow, and I'll have a guy out there. So we already agreed to that. We agreed to getting right on the retaining wall, and as far as the other issues go, I'd be willing to discuss some options. I don't think that right now at the planning board meeting, which in my perspective, I don't think pertains to this other application. I think that this is something separate that I'd be willing to entertain. I'm trying to do the best I can, but at some point there has to be a compromise. When someone's looking for a problem, they're going to find one. And as you know, she's called every agency. She's tried to make waves and tried to stop my project in every which way she can. And I've just been trying to do the best that I can to keep moving forward.
And to Susan's and Mr. D'Agostino's points, there should be room for compromise and discussion. That's always,
Absolutely.
That's always
Absolutely.
the better way. And I have a question for Amy in that regard. To what extent, given the fact that this project is under review, will the planning board have any authority to help to mitigate the situation as opposed to it being a civil matter?
It's a civil matter, even though the project is under review. It's still considered civil between the two property owners.
However, if we were to strongly encourage dialogue and hope that some of these issues could be mitigated, it would save everyone time and money and not involve more legal costs.
Absolutely, and we agreed to that. And again, I spoke to Mr. Bourbonnais prior to the meeting and told him the same exact thing.
Other thoughts from planning board members?
Yeah, I mean, I understand the retaining wall is something that can be done. I think I'm with Susan on the real issue here is the trees. And not so much that they're a screen, but mature trees have a shade benefit and a visual appeal, even if they don't screen the view of the new development. And again, I would strongly encourage you and the Limas to figure out what can be done about that to everyone's satisfaction. I think losing 4 big trees, I understand that the roots cross into your property, but it was the result of this development or it seems to be the result of this development that they were damaged. So if there's a way to work that out, I would like to see that.
Again, and I'm just unclear. I mean, I hired a road contractor to handle that scope of work.
I understand it, but you're responsible for your contract.
So if you hire a building contractor and he excavates on someone else's property, is that the responsibility of the homeowner, or is that the excavator that's...
It's your project.
That's hired by the homeowner?
It's your project.
I'm just not clear on that, that's all.
It's your project, you're the landowner, you're the developer. And
So at that point, are you saying that the site contractor that was hired to do the scope of work, who did his own survey, is not responsible at all?
I think you're responsible. But again, that's a legal issue that I'm not...
That was my question. I just didn't know the answer. That was my question.
And one might assume that they have some kind of insurance for situations like this.
Well, that's what I'm getting at. That's what I'm asking. I mean,
Exactly.
But I think it would, being your project, you would facilitate that with the sub and not just leave it entirely to him to deal with the Limas. I think ultimately it's your responsibility. I could be wrong, but that's my opinion.
Other thoughts, suggestions, questions? Susan, you look like you want to say something.
I'm done.
Okay.
But I'm sorry. I'm really sad about this, because even though I know we've been here a long time, we are trying to accommodate your project. And this is phase 2, so we're going to have to acknowledge it's all one big project, and we're now talking about phase 2. But phase 1, I wish it were kinder to the neighbors that you're building next to. And I'm saddened to find out that these folks who have been out to every meeting and have been kind enough to your workers are not being treated respectfully, and they're being treated like sort of...
There's two sides to every story.
Okay, but
There's
the
two
only...
sides to every
So
story.
is there not a side where...
So you're only hearing
Don't
one
interrupt
side.
me. Sorry,
You're only
stop
hearing one
interrupting
side.
me. Tell me which part of what they expressed is not accurate if there are two sides to this. Because they did bring photographs.
The other day, a few weeks back, I was out there with one of my guys. We're working. We're installing a gang mailbox per the requirements of the U.S. Post Office. Miss Lima came out to me, approached me. I was not going to engage in her. She was agitated. She was swearing because I wasn't speaking to her. She said she's going to do whatever she can to stop my project, and she hates it. I didn't engage her. I kept working. I kept doing what we had to do. I had a witness on site. She was very agitated and made those statements to me. Okay, so I'm willing to work with people, and I've been willing to work with every other neighbor on the street. And you can ask every other neighbor that's on the street and the neighbors that I've built, and the residents that I've built the house for. I think my reputation in this town precedes me.
So in order for us, I don't want to get into a back and forth. No back and forth conversation. I'm sorry, you'll have to leave if you can't control yourself. We have listened very patiently to your comments. We respect the time and diligence that went into your letter. We're trying to hear both stories, but this is also not a civil court. This is the planning board, and we have to review this development. We're at the preliminary stage. As you know, the density is vested. It is human nature. Often when a development occurs adjacent to someone's property, for them to be concerned about the project itself, the density, the clearing, and so on. We hear that all the time. That doesn't mean that we don't take that seriously. So again, I think it is worthwhile to have a conversation, perhaps with staff, perhaps at the TRC, to see what can be done to mitigate the situation in several areas. I do agree with what Paul said, that mature trees and planted grass are not the same at all. They have different impacts, visual, cooling, and so on, drainage, absorption of stormwater. So I think that both parties need to take a deep breath and think about a good outcome for this and some kind of conversation and mitigation to the greatest extent possible.
And we're willing to do that. Again, as I said, talk to Mr. Burbanus. We'll take down the silt fence tomorrow, have a guy there. We'll talk about a procedure or a plan for the wall. We had a couple ideas we were going to speak about on site, and, we're willing to work.
That's very good to hear.
Thank you.
Other thoughts from board members? Jamie, what is our time frame for this application? September?
Yes.
Okay. It would be, I think, worthwhile to continue this. We have brought up a couple of issues with regard to modifications to the plan as far as the fence is concerned. Any other thoughts other than those previously expressed for the plan itself from board members? We've discussed the road width.
Madam Chair, we do have suggested language for the two items that may be of your concern this evening that I could briefly go over.
Go ahead.
And I'll put those on the screen if you give me one moment. little too big. With regards to the width of the driveway, you could potentially, as a planning board, add language to the conditions that the applicant shall modify the proposed entrance drive to a minimum of 20 feet versus the 16 feet depicted on the site plans displayed at public hearing. However, the applicant may reduce the width, and again, this was done quickly, may reduce the width of the drive so long as it does not jeopardize the standards associated with the National Fire Protection standards. With regards to the fence, the applicant shall add a detail to the site plan depicting the proposed 6-foot-high opaque screen fence that is shown along the easterly property boundary on sheet 6 of 9 and 9 of 9. The site plan shall be revised to clearly depict the placement of this solid white fence. The style of the fence and details associated with the proper installation of the proposed fence shall be provided.
Thanks, Jamie. That's helpful. And I think the board hopes that in the coming month, some communication and further resolution can be had.
Madam Chair, if I may be heard, these are very simple issues. The language has been suggested. The fence can be inserted. We still have to do a final plan here. There isn't anything from a planning perspective that should delay this project for a month. That's unreasonable.
It's not unreasonable if we have until September, and next month is July. So I think continuing it to July when we have until September.
I'd respectfully disagree. You may have 3 months. This is not a 50-unit project. This is a very simple project, and I would hate to think that the board is delaying an applicant who has always done his best on this project. He's committed to work with the planner. The town still has to accept the road. There's a final plan. It looks like over an issue that's not a planning issue, I've got a project that's going to be unnecessarily delayed a month.
Mr. Lander, you just heard 15 minutes of back and forth with regard to
that had nothing to do with this application before the planning board. Respectfully, I realize that they've got a dispute and they should work it out, but it's got nothing to do with this application.
I don't think the board will be comfortable, and correct me, board members, if I'm wrong, making a decision tonight without having had that conversation between the applicant who's willing to do so and the abutting property owner.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
motion to continue the public hearing to our next regularly scheduled meeting on July 26th.
Motion from Paul. Is there a second? Continue this until our July meeting.
I'll second that.
Second from Robin. Further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Peter? 1 nay. Motion carries. Last agenda item. Generally we take a break at 9 o'clock. It is now 9:26. The board will take a 5-minute break.
Madam Chair, just as a kind reminder to the planning board members, we are still recording on video and your mics are live.
The board is back in session. Our final agenda item is public hearing continued from May 24, 2022, development plan review, advisory to zoning board, plant-based compassion care.
May I ask, I'm sorry to interrupt, but could we approve, if the board is okay, a brief addition to the agenda of just general cannabis? Because I think we're going to be discussing it as part of this, okay? Just generally discuss on cannabis regulation.
Do we need to make a motion? Yes, please.
Susan, are you making that motion?
Could I make a motion that we add an item to the agenda, a general discussion of cannabis sales in South Kingstown?
Second.
We have a motion from Susan, a second from Paul. Is there further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Peter, yes. Aye.
Madam Chair, for clarity, that would be added under agenda item F, reports and special items.
Very good. All right, Jamie, you have the floor. Plant-based compassionate care, can you?
Again, Madam Chair, we had another request from the applicant to table this application, why they are working with their client on the status of how they are moving forward with this project. This is an application before you for a medical marijuana retail facility for the distribution of product for those carrying medical marijuana cards. The applicant is before you as a DPR review that requires it to go referral to zoning. In the interim, the applicant has also received a zoning permit to establish a corporate footprint for the purposes of office space at the site, not to include the, we'll call it the retail distribution of a medical dispensary. So they are potentially operating, utilizing the office space and vetting clients and putting them in the queue for future distribution. So if anyone hears there's an operational medical marijuana dispensary in town, that is incorrect. That is still subject to your purview and the zoning board's purview. What has been established is an office by a licensee under Rhode Island state law, but there is no permits for the dispensary aspect on Persian.
And the office is open now for business?
I believe the office is open.
So then how does that relate to this former application or actually?
So again, you have no timeframes associated with the DPR review, so the applicant has asked you to table it. We have corresponded with the applicant to explain to them that if it potentially goes beyond this month to your July meeting, we will ask them for a statement that they understand if they ask it to be tabled and then reactivate it. We would request and or require them to renotice the hearing in the newspaper and reimburse the town for those costs, as well as notifying all the abutters as required by our regulations because of the lapse in time.
So they're asking for a continuation?
Continuation until July.
Questions, comments?
I have a question. So I read about this, it was in the Providence Journal, and what it implied was that because they're operating basically like a podiatrist's office, they have that right to that office space by right without any kind of anything.
Correct.
So right now they're operating just like any other therapist office, and they don't need any approvals.
They are a corporate office.
So as long as they continue along that path, that's just, it is what it is. It would be if they wanted to become an actual retail or distribution center that they would need to come back before us?
Right.
Okay.
My understanding is the zoning official reviewed the use table, right? So what they requested the zoning certificate for and what it's currently being used as is for patient consultation space. So not actually, although it's licensed by DBR as a as a medical marijuana compassion center. That's not really what it is from a zoning perspective.
So can I ask another question? So they are, I believe, distributing all of their product out of another town. Is South Kingstown receiving sales tax on this if it's out of this space? Do we know how that works?
South Kingstown has not permitted a dispensary within its boundaries.
Huh.
They have office space.
Okay, so then I have another question. So last night's town council meeting was confusing, I think, to most of the people who were watching because it was implied that this operation could potentially just switch to recreational sales if they were able to get a state permit. That was what was implied last night at the town council meeting.
I'll attempt to answer that, and if I misspeak, I'll have council do that.
Okay.
So there is language contained within the state law that if you have a licensed medical marijuana dispensary and you are permitted by the town to dispense at that site, you will potentially be able to apply for a hybrid license, which will allow you to dispense medical marijuana and recreational marijuana once you pay a fee of, I believe, $125,000 to the state of Rhode Island. This, again, has not been approved as a dispensary within the town of South Kingstown. It is only approved as an office complex, office building. So they do not have a license from the zoning board to dispense within South Kingstown. So it may be a gray area of the law that may need further interpretation by both the municipality and the state of Rhode Island.
So I have one more question. I have one more question before you wrap up. So for each of the different companies that came before us for that pre-approval for medical, we specifically stated to each of those applicants that in no way does this imply that they could rotate to retail recreational if that came down the road. Is it maybe different that they could, that whatever we approve for medical could just become something else without also a secondary approval?
Let me answer your question with imagine that one of the facilities that we reviewed and approved had been selected in the lottery, and then they would have acted on that special use permit and established a compassion center. Despite that condition in our approval, the Cannabis Act would have overridden that. So, regarding this facility that's currently before you and may or may not come back before you, I don't know what their intent is regarding transitioning to a hybrid medical marijuana recreational cannabis retailer. We'll have to see what the voters will say about that. I would think the town would want to speak to the applicant and DBR if the applicant were to take the position that an office could entitle it under the Cannabis Act to become a cannabis retail site.
Right.
I don't think it could.
Any other questions? Would someone like to make a motion to continue this item to our regular meeting in July, which is the 26th? We have a motion from Peter. Do we have a second? Second from Paul. Is there further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Any reports and special items? Jamie, do you have anything for us?
Just before Amy goes over or some cannabis information, just a quick update on American Rescue Plan Act. I know some of you may have heard that Wesson and Sampson and Union Studios have been in town. So just stepping back a little bit, the town is receiving $8.95 million out of the American Rescue Plan Act. The town council in July of 2021 had approved the framework for a spend plan associated with that. A significant portion of that, a little over $4 million, is associated with economic redevelopment in the town's villages and downtowns. The town authorized the town manager to enter into a contract with a consultant to help manage and develop the framework for the spend plan for American Rescue. The firm that was selected was from Wesson and Sampson with four subcontractors, maybe three subcontractors. Primary subcontractor as it relates to land use planning and design is Union Studios out of Providence. Union Studios and Wesson and Sampson's were here on June 14th and 15th to walk all of the downtowns, sit within this council chambers and start the charrette process internally with planning staff. They will be back in town this week, this Wednesday and Thursday. They will be, again, working internal within the town hall on formalizing design renderings, drawings, streetscapes for our village areas, primarily West Kingstown, the 108 corridor associated with, in essence, the police station, Dollar General, Tony's Pizza, the John Deere, and up to the propane facility, and looking at how improvements can be done there, both Peacedale, Wakefield, and Old Tower Hill. The other village area would be the Matunic Beach area and Ocean Mist. So they've been boots on the grounds for almost 16 hours on two prior days. They'll be boots on the ground in this facility for another 16 hours over 2 days, working on those design plans for those communities. After that process, we will move it along to seek public input on some of those plans that are generated, as well as town council input. And the planning board will be involved in that process at some point.
Thanks, Jamie. Let's move on to our last agenda item, general cannabis regulations. Amy.
I think we might be ready to start digging into this next month, meaning at the next work session. As you know, the council approved placing the question on the ballot, and the text of the ballot question is set by state law. Now that the council has passed that resolution, the state, and as you know, the Cannabis Control Commission hasn't been established yet, but that's who will be issuing the licenses once it becomes operational. The state will not issue any new licenses for cannabis facilities in town unless and until the voters so approve at the referendum. If the voters approve, we would recommend that we have some zoning in place. My recollection is that when we amended the zoning ordinance several years ago to address compassion centers, the ordinance doesn't distinguish between medical and non-medical marijuana. So I think it's worth taking a look at that. Yep. So, and there are several different categories of facilities. There's not only retail sales, but facilities of licenses for manufacture, cultivation, and testing. The referendum the voters won't have the option to pick and choose. So the voters won't be able to say, yes, we want everything but retail. The text of the question is all or nothing. If the voters reject cannabis licenses, then the town won't be eligible for revenue sharing, because there is some significant revenue that's expected to flow to the municipalities that are host to these, the retail dispensaries. And the zoning, the zones, I think we're in zone 6, just like the zones are identical to the zones that were used for the lottery system for the new compassion centers. So there will be 24 cannabis retail licenses issued statewide, no more than 4 per zone of the 6 zones. And there are we can expect substantial regulations to be promulgated by the Cannabis Control Commission. The legislation calls for the licenses to be issued as early as December. I don't see that happening. I think the rollout was delayed in other states, but I think the best course of action is for us to have zoning in place. And the zoning can be written such that if the voters reject everything, the zoning, that certainly the voters will have the last say. But I just want you to all start thinking about what might be appropriate where. And we can talk about this in more detail at the next work session, and I'll provide you with the law. I will say that unlike medical marijuana, where the town's authority with respect to zoning and land use regulation was not really constrained by the medical marijuana law, the Cannabis Act severely, I think, constrains the town's zoning authority, and I'll explain that in a little more detail when we discuss it next.
Yeah. Just a summary of what Amy mentioned with regards to the restrictions. You cannot make your restrictions so onerous that it would be nearly impossible for someone to receive a license to do retail sales. There are provisions in there that allow you to consider traffic and parking. So those are your primary things. If a decision's made that retail sales is or manufacturing or product development is acceptable use within the community via that referendum, again, the formation of a regulation should really be concentric on where you think it is appropriate to be cited within the community, and then what parameters are needed when you're reviewing that site plan with regards to traffic and parking. It is significant. The closest example is Massachusetts, which has been almost in operation for 3 years. In this past, I believe, calendar year, being 2021, Massachusetts had $1.3 billion in retail sales. That was generated by just plus or minus 196 retail shops. So again, to Amy's point, you're not at the scale of Massachusetts because you're only looking at 24 licenses initially, but there's a substantial amount of resources available for the private sector to enter this business, and there is some significant tax revenue. Typical retail store is between $2 and $3 million, and that it could be higher, could be lower. It's really an influx of what the population is.
With $3 million
it's $2 or $3 million worth of retail sales
per
outlet
in a year, or
in a year. In a year. So again, those we'll say 200 stores in Massachusetts equated for $1.3 billion in sales.
Is there any reason why we wouldn't treat zoning for this any different from zoning for a liquor store?
Again, a lot of communities have looked at the rationale with regards to setbacks to schools and churches and other public spaces, similar to liquor control acts and liquor control regulations. The difference is the parking analysis. There is never a run on a six-pack or a
well, I mean, thanks the holidays, you see the cop.
You see and it's interesting if you look at the research and the literature written. There is an uptick in holiday sales associated with recreational marijuana, similar to liquor sales in those states that allow it. So again, parking and traffic and circulation, from my perspective, if the community decides it's an acceptable use, are the most important things. And its impact on abutting residents.
Is there anything in the legislation that directs how a community would spend any portion of the money? Like I'm thinking like additional money for treatment, or you'd have to put some part of the revenue toward affordable housing or something. Is there anything in there that?
I'm not aware.
And that's a bad example, but is there anything that says some portion of the money would have to be spent a certain way?
To my knowledge, and I'll confirm this, the state law doesn't constrain the town on its spending.
Well, that's nice for a change, isn't it?
To my knowledge, I know that the state constrains itself with regard to.
So there are two taxes that the state charges. There's I think a roughly 10% excise tax, and then there's a second 6+ plus or minus percent sales tax associated with it. The town's take is no more than 3%. And I'm to Amy's point, I believe the town's 3%. So again, if you looked at a $2 million facility, that's $60,000. You know, it's real money. It's not lottery money that you can go build a new school with, but it is revenue. And my understanding is that is unconstrained. So the municipality brings that in under the general fund and can use it. I believe there are portions of the 10% and 6% that are earmarked for specific programs.
And how might the development of zoning regulations for this use be influenced by the Cannabis Control Commission, which has not yet set any kind of regulatory?
There's a number of restrictions on the town's authority in the statute as it was enacted, so I'll be more specific and have a memo for you next month.
Okay.
And I'm just thinking, common sense sort of says that if there are, how many, 24 statewide?
24 to start.
24 to start, that the traffic, that the traffic wouldn't be, I mean, yeah, I mean, initially there might be, you know, it seems like it would just be like another CVS.
But that's after 24 open, not the first guy.
Yeah.
Again, Massachusetts has had a different experience, even with multiple vendors and multiple outlets online, that when a new outlet potentially opens in an area that is not served, that there are traffic implications.
Okay, thank you. And before we adjourn, the next TRC is July 13th, is that correct?
So we do need a representative for that and a time.
I haven't done it in quite some time.
Oh, yeah. Joe's not here, so Paul's volunteer him.
I'll do it.
9 o'clock or 1 o'clock, Madam Chair?
1 o'clock would be better for me.
Okay, thank you.
Motion to adjourn? Thank you.
Second.
Motion from Peter, second from Paul. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
The other night, we had some lights. Yes. I thought it sounded like gunfire, and the dog was like, yes. Okay.